The Conquering Hero of the Humboldts by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Conquering Hero of the Humboldts by Robert Howard. I was in Sundance, enjoying myself a little after a long trail drive up from the Cimarron, when I got a letter from Abednego Raxton, which said as follows: Dear Breckinridge, that time I paid your fine down in Tucson for breaking the county clerk's leg, you said you'd give me a hand any time I ever needed help. Well, Breckinridge, I need your assistance right now. The rustlers is stealing me ragged. It has got so I nail my bed kivers to the bunk every night, or they'd steal the blankets right off of me, Breckinridge. Moreover, a stumbling block on the path of progress by the name of Ted Bisset is running sheep on the range next to me. This is more'n a man can endure, Breckinridge. So I want you to come up here right away and help me find out who is stealing my stock and bust Ted Bisset's head for him, the low-minded skunk. Hoping you are the same, I begs to remain as usual. Your abused friend, Raxton, Esquire. P.S. That sap-headed misfit Johnny Willoughby, which used to work for me down on Green River, is sheriff here, and he couldn't catch flies if they was bogged down in molasses. Well, I didn't feel it was none of my business to mix into any row Abednego might be having with the sheepmen, so long as both sides fit fair. But rustlers was a different matter. Elkins detests a thief. So I mounted Captain Kidd, after the usual battle, and headed for Lonesome Lizard, which was the nighest town to his ranch. I found myself approaching this town a while before noon one blazing hot day, and as I crossed a right thick-timbered creek, shrieks for aid and assistance suddenly bust the stillness. A hoss also neighed wildly, and Captain Kidd begun to snort and champ like he always does when they is a bar or a cougar in the vicinity. I got off and tied him, because if I was going to have to fight some critter like that, I didn't want him mixing into the scrap. He was just as likely to kick me as the varmint. I then went on foot in the direction of the screams, which was growing more desperate every minute, and I presently come to a thicket with a big tree in the middle of it, and there they was. One of the purtiest gals I ever seen was roosting in the tree and screeching blue murder, and they was a cougar climbing up after her. "Help!" says she wildly. "Shoot him!" I jest wish some of them tenderfoots which calls theirselves naturalists could see this, I says, taking off my Stetson. Elkins never forgets his manners. Some of them has tried to tell me cougars never attacks human beings, nor climbs trees, nor prowls in the daytime. I bet you this would make 'em realize they don't know it all, just like I said to that'n which I seen in Warpaint, Nevada, last summer. "Will you stop talking and do something?" she says fiercely. "Ow!" Because he had retched up and made a pass at her foot with his left paw. I seen this had went far enough, so I told him sternly to come down. But all he done was look down at me and spit in a very insulting manner. So I retched up and got him by the tail and yanked him down and whapped him agin the ground 3 or 4 times, and when I let go of him he run off a few yards and looked back at me in a most peculiar manner. Then he shaken his head like he couldn't believe it hisself, and let a shuck as hard as he could peel it in the general direction of the North Pole. "Why'n't you shoot him?" demanded the gal, leaning as far out as she could to watch him. "Aw, he won't come back," I assured her. "Hey, look out!" That limb's going to break!" Which it did just as I spoke, and she come tumbling down with a shriek of despair. She still held on to the limb with a desperate grip, however, which is why it rapped me so severe on the head when I catched her. "Oh!" says she, letting go of the limb and grabbing me. "Am I hurt?" "I don't know," I says. "You better let me carry you to wherever you want to go." "No," says she, getting her breath back. "I'm all right. Let me down." So I done so, and she says, "I got a hoss tied over there behind that fir. I was riding home from Lonesome Lizard and stopped to poke a squirrel out of a holler tree. It weren't a squirrel, though. It was that dang lion. If you'll get my hoss for me, I'll be riding home. Pap's ranch is just over that ridge to the west. I'm Margaret Brewster." "I'm Breckinridge Elkins of Bear Creek, Nevada," I says. "I'm heading for Lonesome Lizard, but I'll be riding back this way before long. Can I call on you?" "Well," she says, "I'm engaged to marry a feller, but it's conditional. I got a suspicion he's a spineless failure, and I told him flat if he didn't succeed at the job he's working on now, not to come back. I detests a failure. That's why I like your looks," says she, giving me an admiring glance. "A man which can wrastle a mountain lion with his bar hands is worth any gal's time. I'll send you word at Lonesome Lizard. If my fiancé flops like it looks he's going to do, I'd admire to have you call." "I'll be awaiting your message with eager heart and honest devotion," I says, and she blushed daintily and clumb on her hoss and pulled her freight. I watched her till she was clean out of sight, then hove a sigh that shook the acorns out of the surrounding oaks, and wended my way back to Captain Kidd in a sort of rose-colored haze. I was so entranced I started to get on to Captain Kidd on the wrong end and never noticed till he kicked me violently in the belly. "Love, Captain Kidd," I says to him dreamily, batting him between the eyes with my pistol butt, "is youth's sweet dream." But he made no response outside of stomping on my corns. Captain Kidd has got very little sentiment. So I mounted and pulled for Lonesome Lizard, which I arrived at maybe an hour later. I put Captain Kidd in the strongest livery stable I could find and seen he was fed and watered, then warned the stable hands not to antagonize him. Then I headed for the Red Warrior Saloon. I needed a little refreshments before I started for Abednego's ranch. I'd taken me a few drams and talked to the men which was foregathered there, being mainly cowmen. The sheep men patronized the buck and ram across the street. That was the first time I'd ever been in Montana, and them fellers weren't familiar with my reputation, as was showed by their manner. Howsomever, they was perlite enough, and after we'd downed a few fingers of corn scrapings, one of 'em asked me where I was from, proving they considered me an honest man with nothing to conceal. When I told 'em, one of 'em said, "By golly, they must grow big men in Nevada if you're a sample. You're the biggest critter I ever seen in the shape of a human." "I bet he's as stout as Big John," says one, and another says, "That can't be. This gent is human after all. Big John ain't." I was just fixing to ask them who this John varmint was, when one of 'em cranes his neck toward the winder and says, "Speak of the devil and you gets a whiff of brimstone. Here comes John across the street now. He must have seen this gent coming in and is on his way to make his usual challenge. The sight of a man as big as him is like waving a red flag at a bull." I looked out the winder and seen a critter about the size of a granary coming across the street from the buck and ram, followed by a gang of men which looked like him, but not nigh as big. "What kind of folks air they?" I asked with interest. "They ain't neither Mexicans nor Injuns, but they sure ain't white men neither." "Aw, they're hunkies," says a little sawed-off cowman. "Ted Bisset brung 'em in here to herd sheep for him. And that big un's John. He ain't got no sense, but you never seen such a hunk of muscle in your life." "Where are they from?" I asked. "Canada?" "Nah," says he. "They come originally from a place called Europe. I don't know where it is, but I jedge it's somewhere east of Chicago." But I knowed them fellers never originated nowheres on this continent. They was rough dressed and wild looking, with knives in their belts, and they didn't look like no folks I'd ever saw before. They come into the barroom, and the one called John bristled up to me very hostile, with his little beady black eyes. He stuck out his chest about a foot and hit it with his fist, which was about the size of a sledgehammer. It sounded like a man beating a bass drum.
"You strong man," says he. "I strong too. We wrestle, eh?"
"Nah," I says. "I don't care nothing about wrastling." He give a snort which blowed the foam off of every beer glass on the bar, and looked around till he seen an iron rod lying on the floor. It looked like the handle of a branding iron, and was pretty thick. He grabbed this and bent it into a V and throwed it down on the bar in front of me, and all the other hunkies jabbered admiringly. This childish display irritated me, but I controlled myself and drunk another finger of whiskey, and the bartender whispered to me, "Look out for him. He aims to prod you into a fight. He's nearly killed 9 or 10 men with his bare hands. He's a mean one." "Well," says I, tossing $1 onto the bar and turning away, "I got more important things to do than wrestle an outlandish foreigner in a barroom. I gotta eat my dinner and get out to the Raxton ranch quick." But at that moment Big John chose to open his bazoo. There are some folks which can't never let well enough alone.
"'Fraid," jeered he. "Yah, yah."
The hunkies all whooped and guffawed, and the cattleman scowled. "What you mean, afraid?" I gasped, more dumbfounded than mad. It'd been so long since anybody's made a remark like that to me. I was plumb flabbergasted. Then I remembered I was amongst strangers which didn't know my reputation, and I realized it was my duty to correct that there oversight before somebody got hurt on account of ignorance. So I said, "All right, you dumb foreign mutton head, I'll wrestle you." But as I went up to him, he doubled up his fist and hit me severely on the nose, and them hunkies all bust into loud, rude laughter. That warn't wise. A man had better twist a striped thunderbolt's tail than hit a Elkins unexpected on the nose. I give a roar of irritation and grabbed Big John and started committing mayhem on him, free and enthusiastic. I swept all the glasses and bottles off of the bar with him, and knocked down a hanging lamp with him, and fanned the floor with him till he was limp. Then I throwed him the full length of the barroom. His head went through the panels of the back door, and the other hunkies, which had stood petrified, stampeded into the street with howls of horror. So I taken the branding iron handle and straightened it out, and bent it around his neck, and twisted the ends together in a knot, so he had to get a blacksmith to file it off after he come to, which was several hours later. All them cowmen was staring at me with their eyes popped out of their heads, and seemed plumb incapable of speech. So I give a snort of disgust at the whole incident, and strode off to get my dinner. As I left, I heard one feller, which was holding on to the bar like he was too weak to stand alone, say feebly to the dumbfounded bartender, "Gimme a drink, quick. I never thunk I'd live to see something I couldn't believe when I was looking right smack at it. I couldn't make no sense out of this, so I headed for the dining room of the Montana Hotel and Bar. But my hopes of peace and quiet was an illusion. I'd just started on my fourth beefsteak when a big maverick in star-top boots and store-bought clothes come surging into the dining room and bellered,
"Is your name Elkins?"
"Yeah, it is," I says, "but I ain't deef. You don't have to yell."
"Well, what the hell you mean by interfering with my business?" he squalled, ignoring my reproof.
"I don't know what you're talking about," I growled, emptying the sugar bowl into my coffee cup with some irritation. It looked like Lonesome Lizard was full of maniacs which craved destruction. "Who air you, anyhow?"
"I'm Ted Bisset, that's who," howled he, convulsively gesturing toward his six-shooter. "And I'm on to you. You're a damn Nevada gunman old Abed Raxton's brought up here to run me off the range. He's been bragging about it all over town, and you start your work by running off my sheep herders."
"What do you mean, I run your sheep herders off?" I demanded, amazed.
"They run off after you maltreated Big John," he gnashed, with his face convulsed. "They're so scared of you they won't come back without double pay. You can't do this to me, you expletive deleted."
A man don't live which can call me that name with impunity. I impulsively hit him in the face with my fried steak, and he give a impassioned shriek and pulled his gun. But some grease had gotten in his eyes, so all he done with his first shot was bust the syrup pitcher at my elbow, and before he could cock his gun again, I shot him through the arm. He dropped his gun and grabbed the place with his other hand and made some remarks which ain't fittin' for to repeat. I yelled for another steak, and Bisset yelled for a doctor, and the manager yelled for the sheriff. The last named individual didn't get there till after the doctor and the steak had arrove and was set in Bisset's arm. The doctor, I mean, and not the steak, which a trembling waiter brung me. Quite a crowd had gathered by this time and was watching the doctor work with great interest and offering advice which seemed to infuriate Bisset, judging from his language. He also discussed his busted arm with considerable passion, but the doctor warn't a bit worried. You never seen such a cheerful gent. He was jovial and gay no matter how loud Bisset yelled. You could tell right off he was a man which could take it. But Bisset's friends was very mad, and Jack Campbell, his foreman, was muttering something about 'em taking the law into their own hands, when the sheriff came prancing in, waving a six-shooter and hollering, "Where is he? Point out the scoundrel to me."
"There he is!"
Everybody yelled and ducked like they expected gunplay. But I had already recognized the sheriff, and when he seen me he recoiled and shoved his gun out of sight like it was red hot or something.
"Breckinridge Elkins,"
says he. Then he stopped and studied a while. Then he told them to take Bisset out to the bar and pour some liquor down him. When they'd went, he sat down at the table and says, "Breck, I want you to understand that they ain't nothing personal about this, but I got to arrest you. It's agin the law to shoot a man inside of the city limits." "I ain't got time to get arrested," I told him. "I gotta get over to old Abed Raxton's ranch." "But listen, Breck," argued the sheriff. It was John Willoughby, just like old Abed said. "What'll folks think if I don't jail you for shooting a leading citizen? Election's coming up and my hat's in the ring," says he, gulping my coffee. "Bisset shot at me first," I said. "Why didn't you arrest him?" "Well, he didn't hit you. says Johnny, absently cramming half a pie into his mouth and making a stab at my pertaters. Anyway, he's got a busted arm and ain't able to go to jail just now. Besides, I need the sheepmen's votes. Oh, I don't like jails, I said irritably, and he begun to weep. If you was a friend to me, sobs he, you'd be glad to spend a night in jail to help me get reelected. I'd do as much for you. The whole county's giving me hell anyway, 'cause I ain't been able to catch none of them cattle rustlers, and if I don't arrest you, I don't have a Chinaman's chance at the polls. How can you do me like this after the times we had together in the old days? Oh, stop blubbering, I says. You can arrest me if you want to. What's the fine? I don't want to collect no fine, Breck, says he, wiping his eyes on the oilcloth table cover and filling his pockets with doughnuts. I figures a jail sentence will give me more prestige. I'll let you out first thing in the morning. You won't tear up the jail, will you, Breck? I promised I wouldn't, and then he wants me to give up my guns, and I refuses. But good gosh, Breck, he pleaded, it'd look awful funny for a prisoner to keep on his shooting irons. So I give 'em to him just to shut him up. And then he wanted to put his handcuffs onto me, but they weren't big enough to fit my wrists. So he said if I'd lend him some money, he could have the blacksmith make me some leg irons. But I refused profanely. So he said, all right, it was just a suggestion and no offense intended. So we went down to the jail. The jailer was off sleeping off a drunk somewheres, but he left the key hanging on the door, so we went in. Pretty soon along come Johnny's deputy, Bige Gantry, a long, loose-jointed cuss with a dangerous eye. So Johnny sent him to the Red Warrior for a can of beer, and whilst he was gone, Johnny bragged on him a heap. Why, says he, Bige is the only man in the county which has ever got within shooting distance of them dern outlaws. He was by hisself, wuss luck. If I'd been along, we'd a scuppered the whole gang. I asked him if he had any idea who they was, and he said Bige believed they was a gang up from Wyoming. Then I said, well, then in that case they got a hangout in the hills somewheres and ought to be easier to run down than men which scattered to their homes after each raid. Bige got back with the beer about then. Johnny told him that when I got out of jail he was going to deputize me and we'd all go after them outlaws together. So Bige said that was great and looked me over pretty sharp, and we sat down and started playing poker. Long about supper time the jailer come in, looking tolerable seedy, and Johnny made him cook us some supper. Whilst we was eating, the jailer stuck his head into my cell and said, "A gent is out there craving audience with Mr. Elkins." "Tell him the prisoner's busy," says Johnny. "I done so," says the jailer, "and he says if you don't let him in pretty dern quick, he's gonna bust in and cut your throat." "That must be old Abe Raxton," says Johnny. "Better let him in. Breck," says he, "I looks to you to protect me if the old cuss gets mean." So old Abed come waltzing into the jail with fire in his eye and corn liquor on his breath. At the sight of me, he let out a squall which was painful to hear. Hell if I help you, be you big lummox," he hollered. "I sends for you to help me bust up a gang of rustlers and sheep herders, and the first thing you does is to get in jail." "'Twarn't my fault," I says. "Them sheep herders started picking on me."
Well, he snarls, why didn't you drill Bisset center when you was at it?
I come up here to shoot rustlers, not sheep herders, I said.
What's the difference? He snarled.
Them sheepmen has probably got as much right to the range as you cowmen, I says.
See such outrageous blasphemy, says he, shocked. You've bungled things so far, but they's one good thing. Bisset had to hire back his derned hunky herders at double wages. He don't no more mind spending money than he does spilling his own blood, that cussed tightwad. Well, what's your fine?
Ain't no fine, I says. Johnny wants me to stay in jail a while. At this, old Abed convulsively went for his gun, and Johnny got behind me and hollered, "Don't you dare shoot a ossifer of the law!"
It's a spite trick, gibbered old Abed. He's been mad at me ever since I fired him off of my payroll. After I kicked him off of my ranch, he run for sheriff. And the night of the election, everybody was so drunk they voted for him by mistake, or for a joke, or something. And since he's been in office, he's been letting the sheepmen steal me right out of house and home.
"That's a lie," says Johnny heatedly. "I give you as much protection as anybody else, you old buzzard. I just ain't been able to run any of them critters down, that's all. But you wait. Bige is on their trail, and we'll have 'em behind the bars before the snow falls."
Before the snow falls in Guatemala, maybe, snorted old Abed. All right, blast you. I'm going, but I'll have Breckinridge out of here if I have to burn the cussed jail. A Raxton never forgets.
So he stalked out sulphurously, only turning back to snort,
"Sheriff! Bah! 7 murders in the county unsolved since you come into office. You'll let them sheepmen murder us all in our beds. We ain't had a hanging since you was elected."
After he left, Johnny brooded a while and finally says, "The old Lobo's right about them murders, only he neglected to mention that 4 of them was sheepmen. I know it's cattlemen and sheepmen killing each other, each side accusing the other of rustling stock, but I can't prove nothing. A hanging would set me solid with the voters." Here he eyed me hungrily and ventured, "If somebody'd just up and confess to some of them murders." "You needn't look at me like that," I said. "I never killed nobody in Montana." "Well," he argued, "nobody could prove you never done 'em, and after you was hanged—" "Listen here, you," I says with some passion. "I'm willing to help a friend get elected all I can, but they's a limit." "Oh, well, all right," he sighed. "I didn't much figure you'd be willing anyway. Folks is so dern selfish these days. All they thinks about is theirselves. But listen here. If I was to bust up a lynching mob, it'd be nigh as good a boost for my campaign as a legal hanging. I'll tell you what. Tonight I'll have some of my friends put on masks and come take you out and pretend like they was gonna hang you. Then when they got the rope around your neck, I'll run out and shoot in the air and they'll run off. And I'll get credit for upholding law and order. Folks always disapproves of mobs unless they happens to be in 'em." So I said, all right. He urged me to be careful and not hurt none of 'em, because they was all his friends and would be mine. I asked him would they bust the door down, and he said there weren't no use in damaging the property like that. They could hold up the jailer and take the key off of him. So he went off to fix things, and after a while Bige Gantry left and said he was on the trace of a clue to them cattle rustlers, and the jailer started drinking hair tonic mixed with tequila, and in about an hour he was stiffer'n a wet lariat. Well, I laid down on the floor on a blanket to sleep without taking my boots off. And about midnight a gang of men with masks come, and they didn't have to hold up the jailer 'cause he was out cold. So they taken the key off him and all the loose change and plug tobacco out of his pockets too, and opened the door. And I asked, "Are you the gents which is gonna hang me?" And they says, "We be." So I got up and asked them if they had any liquor. One of them give me a good snort out of his hip flask. And I said, "All right, let's get it over with so I can go back to sleep." He was the only one which done any talking, and the rest didn't say a word. I figured they was bashful. He said, "Let's tie your hands behind you so's to make it look real." And I said, "All right." They tied me with some rawhide thongs, which I reckon would have held the average man all right. So I went outside with them, and there was an oak tree right close to the jail, nigh some bushes. I figured Johnny was hiding over behind them bushes. They had a barrel for me to stand on, and I got onto it. They throwed a rope over a big limb and put the noose around my neck, and the feller says, "Any last words?" "Oh, hell," I says, "this is plumb silly. Ain't it about time for Johnny—" At this moment they kicked the barrel out from under me. Well, I was kind of surprised, but I tensed my neck muscles and waited for Johnny to rush out and rescue me. But he didn't come, and the noose began to pinch the back of my neck. So I got disgusted and says, "Hey, let me down." Then one of them which hadn't spoke up before says, "By golly, I never heard a man talk after he'd been strung up before." I recognized that voice. It was Jack Campbell, Bisset's foreman. Well, I have got a quick mind in spite of what my cousin Bearfield Buckner says, so I knowed right off something was fishy about this business. So I snapped the thongs on my wrists and reached up and caught hold of the rope I was hung with by both hands and broke it. Them scoundrels was so surprised they didn't think to shoot at me till the rope was already broke, and then the bullets all went over me as I fell. When they started shooting, I knowed they meant me no good, and acted accordin'. I dropped right in the midst of 'em, and brung 3 to the ground with me, and during the few seconds to taken me to choke and batter 'em unconscious, the others was scared to fire for fear of hitting their friends, we was so tangled up. So they clustered round me and started beating me over the head with their gun butts, and I riz up like a bar amongst a pack of hounds, and grabbed 4 more of 'em and hugged 'em till their ribs cracked. Their masks come off during the process, revealing the faces of Bisset's friends. I'd saw 'em in the hotel. Somebody prodded me in the hind leg with a buoy at that moment, which infuriated me, so I throwed them 4 amongst the crowd and hit out right and left, knocking over a man or so at each lick, until I seen a wagon spoke on the ground and stooped over to pick it up. When I done that, somebody throwed a coat over my head and blinded me, and 6 or 7 men then jumped onto my back. About this time I stumbled over some feller which had been knocked down and fell on my belly, and they all started jumping up and down on me enthusiastically. I reached around and grabbed one and dragged him around to where I could reach his left ear with my teeth. I would have taken it clean off at the first snap, only I had to bite through the coat which was over my head. But as it was, I done a good job, judging from his awful shrieks. He put forth a supreme effort and tore away, taking the coat with him, and I shaken off the others and riz up in spite of their puny efforts, with the wagon spoke in my hand. A wagon spoke is a good comforting implement to have in a melee, and very demoralizing to the enemy. This'n busted all to pieces about the 4th or 5th lick, but that was enough. Them which was able to run had all took to their heels, leaving the battlefield strewed with moaning and cussing figgers. Their remarks was shocking to hear, but I give 'em no heed. I headed for the sheriff's office, mad clean through. It was a few hundred yards east of the jail, and just as I rounded the jailhouse, I run smack into a dim figure which come sneaking through the brush, making a curious clanking noise. It hit me with what appeared to be an iron bar, so I went to the ground with it and choked it and beat its head agin the ground till the moon come out from behind a cloud and revealed the bewhiskered features of old Abednego Raxton. "What the hell?" I demanded of the universe at large. "Is everybody in Montana crazy? What air you doing, trying to murder me in my sleep?" "I warn't, you jack-eared lunkhead," snarled he when he could talk. "Then what'd you hit me with that there pinch bar for?" I demanded. "I didn't know it was you," says he, getting up and dusting his breeches. "I thought it was a grizzly bar when you riz up out of the dark. Did you bust out?" "Nah, I never," I said. "I told you I was staying in jail to do Johnny a favor. And you know what that old son of Belial done? He framed it up with Bisset's friends to get me hung. Come on, I'm going over and interview the dern skunk right now." So we went over to Johnny's office, and the door was unlocked and a candle burning, but he weren't in sight. They was a small iron safe there, which I figured he had my guns locked up in, so I got a rock and busted it open, and sure enough, there my shooting irons was. They was also a gallon of corn liquor there, and me and Abed was discussing whether or not we had the moral right to drink it, when I heard somebody remark in a muffled voice, "Woof, woof, woof." So we looked around and I seen a pair of spurs sticking out from under a camp cot over in the corner. I grabbed hold of the boots they was on and pulled 'em out, and a human figure come with 'em. It was Johnny. He was tied hand and foot and gagged, and he had a lump onto his head the size of a turkey egg. I pulled off the gag, and the first thing he says was, "If you sons of perdition drinks my private liquor, I'll have your heart's blood." "You better do some explaining," I says resentfully. "What you mean sicking Bisset's friends onto me?" "I never done such," says he heatedly. "Right after I left the jail I come to the office here and was just fixing to get hold of my friends to frame the fake necktie party when somebody come in at the door and hit me over the head. I thought it was Lige coming in and didn't look round, then whoever it was clouded me. I just a while ago come to myself, and I was tied up like you see."
"If he's telling the truth," says old Abed, "which he seems to be, much as I hates to admit it, it looks like some friend of Bisset's overheard you all talking about this thing, follered Johnny over and put him out of the way for the time being, then raised a mob of his own, knowing Breck wouldn't put up no resistance, thinking they was friends. I told you... Who's that?" We all drawed our irons, then put 'em up as Lige Gantry rushed in, holding on to the side of his head, which was all bloody. "I just had a brush with the outlaws," he hollered. "I've been trailing 'em all night. They waylaid me a while ago 3 miles out of town. They nearly shot my ear off, but if I didn't wing one of 'em, I'm a Dutchman." "Round up a posse," howled Johnny, grabbing a Winchester and cartridge belt. "Take us back to where you had the scrape, Bige." "Wait a minute," I said, grabbing Bige. "Let me see that ear." I jerked his hand away, disregarding the spur he stuck into my leg, and bellered, "Shot hell! That ear was chawed, and I'm the man which done it. You was one of them illegitimates that tried to hang me."
He then whipped out his gun, but I knocked it out of his hand and hit him on the jaw and knocked him through the door. I then followed him outside and taken away the buoy he'd drawed as he rose groggily and throwed him back into the office. And then I went in and I throwed him out again, then went out and throwed him back in again. "How long is this going on?" he asked. "Probably all night," I assured him. "The way I feel right now, I can keep heaving you in and out of this office from now till noon tomorrow." "Hold up," gurgled he. "I'm a hard nut, but I know when I'm licked. I'll confess. I done it." "Done what?" I demanded. "I hit Johnny on the head and tied him up," he howled, grabbing wildly for the door jamb as he went past it. "I rigged the lynching party. I'm in with the rustlers."
"Set him down,"
hollered Abed, grabbing hold of my shirt.
"Quick, Johnny. Help me hold Breckinridge before he kills a valuable witness."
But I shaken him off impatiently and sought Gantry onto his feet. He couldn't stand, so I held him up by the collar, and he gasped, "I lied about trading shots with the outlaws. I've been fooling Johnny all along. Them rustlers ain't no Wyoming gang. They all live around here. Ted Bisset is the head chief of 'em."
"Ted Bisset, eh?"
whooped Abed, doing a war dance and kicking my shins in his glee.
"See there, ya big lummox. What'd I tell you? What you think now, after showing so darn much affection for them cussed sheepmen? Just shooting Bisset in the arm like he was your brother or something. S'wonder you didn't invite him out to dinner. You ain't got the—"
"Ah, shut up," I said fretfully. "Go on, Gantry." "He ain't a legitimate sheepman," says he. "That's just a blind, him running sheep. Ain't no real sheepmen mixed up with him. His gang is just the scrapin's of the country, and they hide out on his ranch when things get hot. Other times they scatters and goes home. They're the ones which has been killing honest sheepmen and cattlemen, trying to set the different factions agin each other so as to make stealing easier. The hunkies ain't in on the deal. He just brung 'em out to herd his sheep because his own men wouldn't do it, and he was afeared if he hired local sheep herders they'd catch on to him. Naturally, we wanted you out of the way when we knowed you'd come up here to run down the rustlers, so tonight I seen my chance when Johnny started talking about staging that fake hanging. I follered Johnny and tapped him on the head and tied him up, and went and told Bisset about the business, and we got the boys together, and you know the rest. It was a peach of a frame-up, and it would have worked too, if we'd been dealing with a human being. Lock me up. All I want right now is a good quiet penitentiary where I'll be safe." "Well," I said to Johnny after he'd locked Gantry up, "all you got to do is ride over to Bisset's ranch and arrest him. He's laid up with his arm and most of his men is crippled. You'll find a number of 'em over by the jail. This ought to elect you." "It will," says he, doing a war dance in his glee. "I'm as good as elected right now. And I'll tell you, Breck, 'tain't the job alone I'm thinking about. I'd 'a' lost my gal if I'd lost the race. But she's promised to marry me if I catch them rustlers and got re-elected. And she won't go back on her word, neither." "Yeah?" I says with idle interest, thinking of my own true love. "What's her name?" "Margaret Brewster," says he. "What?" I yelled in a voice which knocked old Abed over on his back like he'd been hit by a cyclone. Them which accuses me of violent and unusual conduct don't consider how my emotions was stirred up by the knowledge that I had went through all them humiliating experiences just to help a rival take my gal away from me. Throwing Johnny through the office winder and kicking the walls out of the building was just a mild expression of the way I felt about the whole dern affair, and instead of feeling resentful, he ought to have been thankful I was able to restrain my natural feelings as well as I had done. End of the conquering hero of the Humboldts. Harp's Gun Serenade by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Sharp's Gun Serenade by Robert Howard. I was heading for war paint, jogging along easy and comfortable, when I seen a galoot coming up the trail in a cloud of dust, just a burning the breeze. He didn't stop to pass the time of day. He went past me so fast, Captain Kidd missed the snap he made at his hoss, which shows he was sure hightailing it. I recognized him as Jack Sprag, a young waddy which worked on a spread not far from war paint. His face was pale and sot in a look of desperate resolution, like a man which has just bet his pants on a pair of deuces, and he had a rope in his hand, though I couldn't see nothing he might be aiming to lasso. He went fogging on up the trail into the mountains, and I looked back to see if I could see the posse, because about the only time an outlander ever heads for the high Humboldts is when he's about 3 jumps and a low whoop ahead of a necktie party. I seen another cloud of dust all right, but it warn't big enough for more than one man, and pretty soon I seen it was Bill Glanton of war paint. But that was good enough reason for Sprague's haste if Bill was on the prod. Glanton is from Texas, original, and whilst he is a sentimental cuss in repose, he's a ring-tailed whizzer with star-spangled wheels when his feelin's is ruffled, and his feelin's is ruffled tolerable easy. As soon as he seen me, he yelled, "Where'd he go?" "Who?" I says. Us Humboldt folks ain't overflowing with casual information.
"Jack Sprag," says he. "You must have saw him. Where'd he go?"
"He didn't say," I says. Glanton ground his teeth slightly and says, "Don't start your darn hillbilly stalling with me. I ain't got time to waste the week or so it takes to get the information out of a Humboldt Mountain varmint. I ain't chasing that misguided idiot to do him injury. I'm pursuing him to save his life. A gal in war paint has jilted him, and he's so broke up about it he's threatening to ride right over the mortal ridge. Us boys has been watching him and following him around, taking pistols and rat pison and the like away from him. But this morning he gives us the slip and taken to the hills. It was a waitress in the Ball and Heifer restaurant which put me onto his trail. He told her he was going up in the hills where he wouldn't be interfered with and hang himself." "So that's why he had the rope," I says. "Well, it's his own business, ain't it?" "No, it ain't," says Bill sternly. "When a man is in his state, he ain't responsible, and it's the duty of his friends to look after him. He'll thank us in the days to come. Anyway, he owes me $6, and if he hangs himself, I'll never get paid. Come on, dang it! He'll lynch himself while we stands here jawing." "Well, all right," I says. "After all, I got to think about the reputation of the Humboldts. They ain't never been a suicide committed up here before." "Quite right," says Bill. "Nobody ever got a chance to kill hisself up here. Someone else always done it for him." But I ignored this slander and reined Captain Kidd around just as he was fixing to bite off Bill's hoss's ear. Jack had left the trail, but he left sign a blind man could foller. He had a long start on us, but we both had better hosses than his'n, and after a while we come to where he'd tied his hoss among the brush at the foot of Cougar Mountain. We tied our hosses too and pushed through the brush on foot, and right away we seen him. He was climbing up the slope toward a ledge which had a tree growing on it. One limb stuck out over the edge and was just right to make a swell gallows, as I told Bill. But Bill was in a lather.
"He'll get to that ledge before we can catch him," says he. "What'll we do?"
"Shoot him in the leg," I suggested. But Bill says,
"No, darn it. He'll bust himself falling down the slope. And if we start after him, he'll hustle up to the ledge and hang himself before we can get to him. Look there, though."
They's a thicket growing up the slope west of the ledge. You circle round and crawl up through it, whilst I get out in the open and attracts his attention. I'll try to keep him talking till you can get up there and grab him from behind." So I ducked low in the brush and ran around the foot of the slope till I come to the thicket. Just before I div into the tangle, I seen Jack had got to the ledge and was fastening his rope to the limb which stuck out over the edge. Then I couldn't see him no more because that thicket was so dense and full of briars it was about like crawling through a pile of fighting bobcats. But as I wormed my way through it I heard Bill yell,
"Hey, Jack, don't do that, you darn fool!"
"Lemme alone," Jack hollered. "Don't come no closer. This here's a free country. I got a right to hang myself if I wanna."
"But it's a damn fool thing to do," wailed Bill.
"My life is ruined," asserted Jack. "My true love has been betrayed. I'm a wilted tumblebug, I mean tumbleweed, on the sands of time. Destiny has slapped the zero brand on my flank." I don't know what else he said, because at that moment I stepped into something which let out a ear-splitting squall and attached itself violently to my hind leg. That was just my luck. With all the thickets they was in the Humboldts, a darned cougar had to be sleeping in that'n, and of course it had to be me which stepped on him. Well, no cougar's a match for a Elkins in a stand-up fight, but the way to lick him, the cougar I mean, there ain't no way to lick a Elkins, is to get your lick in before he can clinch with you. But the brush was so thick I didn't see him till he had hold to me, and I was so stuck up with them darn briars I couldn't hardly move nohow. So before I had time to do anything about it, he had sunk most of his tushes and claws into me and was retching for new holts as fast as he could rake. It was old Brigamer, too, the biggest, meanest, and oldest cat in the Humboldts. Cougar Mountain is named for him, and he's so dang tough he ain't even scared of Captain Kidd, which is plumb pison to all cat animals. Before I could get old Brigamer by the neck and haul him loose from me, he had clawed my clothes all to pieces, and likewise lacerated my hide, free and generous. In fact, he made me so mad that when I did get him loose, I'd taken him by the tail and mowed down the brush in a 15-foot circle around me with him, till the hair wore off his tail and it slipped out of my hands. Old Brigamer then legged it down off the mountain, squalling fit to bust your eardrums. He was the maddest cougar you ever seen, but not mad enough to renew the fray. He must have recognized me. At that moment I heard Bill yelling for help up above me, so I headed up the slope, swearing loud and bleeding freely, and crashing through them bushes like a wild bull. Evidently the time for stealth and silence was past. I busted into the open and seen Bill hopping around on the edge of the ledge, trying to get hold of Jack, which was kicking like a grasshopper on the end of the rope, just out of reach.
"Why didn't you sneak up soft and easy like I said?" howled Bill. "I was just about to argy him out of the notion. He tied the rope around his neck and was standing on the edge when that racket bust loose in the brush and scared him so bad he fell off of the ledge. Do something."
"Shoot the rope in two," I suggested. But Bill said,
"No, you cussed fool. He'd fall down the cliff and break his neck."
But I seen it warn't a very big tree, so I went and got my arms around it and give it a heave and loosened the roots, then kinda twisted it around so the limb Jack was hung to was over the ledge now. I reckon I busted most of the roots in the process, jedging from the noise. Bill's eyes popped out when he seen that, and he retched up kinda dazed-like and cut the rope with his buoy. Only he forgot to grab Jack before he cut it, and Jack hit the ledge with a resounding thud.
"I believe he's dead," says Bill, despairin'ful. "I'll never get that $6. Look how purple he is." "Aw," says I, biting me off a chew of tobaccer, "all men which has been hung looks that way. I remember once the vigilantes hung Uncle Jepperd Grimes, taking us 3 hours to bring him to after we cut him down. Of course he'd been hanging an hour before we found him." "Shut up and help me revive him," snarled Bill, getting the noose off his neck. "You select the damnedest times to converse about the sins of your infernal relatives. Look, he's coming to," because Jack had begun to gasp and kick around. So Bill brung out a bottle and poured a snort down his gullet. Pretty soon Jack sot up and felt his neck. His jaws wagged but didn't make no sound. Glanton now seemed to notice my disheveled condition for the first time. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked in amazement. "Oh, I stepped on old Brigamer," I scowled. "Well, why didn't you hang on to him?" he demanded. "Don't you know they's a big bounty on his pelt? We could have split the dough." "I've had a belly full of old Brigamer," I replied irritably. "I don't care if I never see him again. Look what he done to my best breeches. If you wants that bounty, you go after it yourself." "And let me alone," unexpectedly spoke up Jack, eyeing us balefully. "I'm free, white, and 21. I hangs myself if I wants to." "You won't neither," says Bill sternly. "Me and your pa is old friends, and I aim to save your wuthless life if I have to kill you to do it." "I defies you," squawked Jack, making a sudden dive between Bill's legs, and he would have got clean away if I hadn't snagged the seat of his breeches with my spur. He then displayed startling ingratitude by hitting me with a rock, and whilst we was tying him up with a hanging rope, his language was scandalous. "Did you ever see such a idjit?" demands Bill, setting on him and fanning hisself with his Stetson. "What are we going to do with him? We can't keep him tied up forever." "We got to watch him close till he gets out of the notion of killing hisself," I says. "He can stay at our cabin for a spell." "Ain't you got some sisters?" says Jack. "A whole cabin full," I says with feeling. "You can't hardly walk without stepping on one. Why?" "I won't go," says he bitterly. "I don't never want to see no woman again, not even a mountain woman. I'm an embittered man. The honey of love has turned to tarantula pison. Leave me to the buzzards and the cougars." "I got it," says Bill. "We'll take him on a hunting trip way up in the high Humboldts. They's some of that country I'd like to see myself. Reckon you're the only white man which has ever been up there, Breck, if we was to call you a white man." "What you mean by that there remark?" I demanded heatedly. "You know damn well I hain't got nary a drop of Injun blood in me. Hey, look out!" I glimpsed a furry hide through the brush, and thinking it was old Brigamer coming back, I pulled my pistols and started shooting at it, when a familiar voice yelled wrathfully, "Hey, you cut that out, darn it!" The next instant a peculiar figure hove into view. A tall, gaunt old Ranny, with long hair and whiskers, with a club in his hand, and a painter hide tied around his middle. Sprag's eyes bugged out, and he says, "Who in the name of God is that?" "Another victim of feminine wiles," I says. "That's old Joshua Braxton of Chawed Ear, the oldest and toughest bachelor in South Nevada. I judge that Miss Stark, the old maid school teacher, has renewed her matrimonial designs onto him. When she starts rolling sheep's eyes at him, he always dons that there garb and takes to the high Sierras." "It's the only way to protect myself," snarled Joshua. "She'd marry me by force if I didn't resort to strategy. Not many folks comes up here and such as does don't recognize me in this rig. What you varmints disturbing my solitude for? Your racket woke me up over in my cave."
When I seen old Brigaber hightailing it for distant parts, I figured Elkins was on the mountain."
"We're here to save this young idjit from his own folly," says Bill. "You come up here because a woman wants to marry you. Jack come up here to decorate a oak limb with his own carcass because one wouldn't marry him."
"Some men never knows their luck," says old Joshua enviously. "Now me, I yearns to return to Chaudiere, which I've been away from for a month. But whilst that old mud hen of a Miss Stark is there, I haunts the wilderness if it takes the rest of my life."
"Well, be at ease, Josh," says Bill. "Miss Stark ain't there no more. She pulled out for Arizona 3 weeks ago."
"Hallelujah!" says Joshua, throwing away his club. "Now I can return and take my place among men. Hold on," says he, reaching for his club again. "Likely they'll be getting some other old harridan to take her place. That newfangled schoolhouse they got at Chaudiere is a curse and a blight. We'll never be shed of husband hunting, rithmetic shooters. I better stay up here after all."
"Don't worry," says Bill. "I seen a picture of the gal that's coming from the east to take Miss Stark's place. I can assure you that a gal as young and pretty as her wouldn't never try to slap her brand on no old buzzard like you."
"Young and purty, you says?" I asked with sudden interest.
"As a racing felly," he declared. "First time I ever known a schoolmarm could be less'n 40 and have a face that didn't look like the beginnin's of a long drought. She's due in Chaudiere on the evening stage, and the whole town turns out to welcome her. The mayor aims to make a speech if he's sober enough, and they got a band up to play."
"Damn foolishness!" snorted Joshua. "I don't take no stock in education."
"I don't know," says I. That was before I got educated. They's times when I wished I could read and write. We ain't never had no school on Bear Creek."
"What would you read outside of the labels on the whiskey bottles?" snorted old Joshua.
"Funny how a purty face changes a man's viewpoint," remarked Bill. "I remember once Miss Stark asked you how you folks up on Bear Creek would like for her to come up and teach your children, and you taken one look at her face and told her it was agin the principles of Bear Creek to have their peaceful innercence invaded by the corrupting influences of education. You said the folks was all banded together to resist such corruption to the last drop of blood." "It's my duty to Bear Creek to provide culture for the rising generation," says I, ignoring them slanderous remarks. "I feels the urge for knowledge a heaving and a surging in my bosom. We're going to have a school on Bear Creek, by golly, if I have to lick every old moss back in the Humboldts. I'll build a cabin for the schoolhouse myself."
"Where'll you get a teacher?" asked Joshua. "Chaudiere ain't gonna let you have theirn."
"Chaudiere is too," I says. "If they won't give her up peaceful, I resorts to force. Bear Creek is going to have culture if I have to wade fetlock deep in gore to provide it. Let's go. I'm raring to open the ball for arts and letters. Are you all with me?"
"No,"
says Jack, plenty emphatic. "What we going to do with him?" demands Glanton. "Oh," I says, "we'll tie him up someplace along the road and pick him up as we come back by." "All right," says Bill, ignoring Jack's impassioned protest. "I'd just as soon. My nerves is frayed riding herd on this young idjit, and I needs a little excitement to quieten them. You can always be counted on for that. Anyway, I'd like to see that there schoolmarm gal myself. How about you, Joshua?"
"You're both crazy,"
growls Joshua.
"But I've lived up here on nuts and jackrabbits till I ain't sure of my own sanity. Anyway, I knows the only way to disagree successfully with Elkins is to kill him, and I got strong doubts of being able to do that. Lead on. I'll do anything within reason to help keep education out of chawed ear. 'Tain't only my personal feelings regarding school teachers. It's the principle of the thing. Get your clothes on and let's hustle then, I says. This painter hide is all I got, says he. You can't go down into the settlements in that rig, I says. I can and will, says he. I'll look as civilized as you do with your clothes all tore to rags, count of old Brigamer. I got a hoss close by. I'll get him if old Brigamer ain't already. So Joshua went to get his hoss, and me and Bill toted Jack down the slope to where our hosses was. His conversation was plentiful and heated, but we ignored it, and was just tying him onto his hoss when Joshua arose with his critter. Then the trouble started. Captain Kidd evidently thought Joshua was some kind of varmint because every time Joshua came nigh him, he'd taken in after him and run him up a tree. And every time Joshua tried to come down, Captain Kidd busted loose from me and run him back up again. I didn't get no help from Bill. All he'd done was laugh like a spotted hyena till Captain Kidd got irritated at them guffaws and kicked him in the belly and knocked him clean through a clump of spruces. Time I got him untangled, he looked about as disreputable as what I did because most of his clothes was tore off of him. We couldn't find his hat neither. So I tore up what was left of my shirt and he tied the pieces round his head like a Apache. Excepting Jack, we was sure a wild-looking bunch. But I was disgusted thinking about how much time we was wasting, whilst all the time Bear Creek was wallering in ignorance. So the next time Captain Kidd went for Joshua, I took and busted him betwixt the ears with my 6-shooter, and that had some effect onto him. A little. So we sought out, with Jack tied onto his hoss and cussing something terrible, and Joshua on a gaunt old nag he rode bareback with a hackamore. I had Bill to ride betwixt him and me so's to keep that painter hide as far away from Captain Kidd as possible. But every time the wind shifted and blowed the smell to him, Captain Kidd retched over and taken a bite at Joshua. Sometimes he bit Bill's hoss by accident, and sometimes he bit Bill. And the language Bill directed at that poor animal was shocking to hear. We was aiming for the trail that runs down from Bear Creek into the Chawed Ear Road, and we hit it a mile west of Bowie Knife Pass. We left Jack tied to a nice shady oak tree in the pass and told him we'd be back for him in a few hours, but some folks is never satisfied. 'Stead of being grateful for all the trouble we'd went to for him, he acted right nasty and called us some names I wouldn't have endured if he'd been in his right mind. But we tied his hoss to the same tree and hustled down the trail and presently come out onto the war-paint Chawed Ear Road, some miles west of Chawed Ear. And there we sighted our first human, a feller on a pinto mare, and when he seen us he give a shriek and took out down the road toward Chawed Ear like the devil had him by the britches. Let's ask him if the teacher's got there yet, I suggested. So we taken out after him, yelling for him to wait a minute. But he just spurred his hoss that much harder, and before we'd gone any piece, Joshua's fool hoss jostled agin Captain Kidd, which smelt that painter skin and got the bit between his teeth and run Joshua and his hoss 3 miles through the bresh before I could stop him. Bill followed us, and of course, time we got back to the road, the feller on the pinto mare was out of sight long ago. So we headed for Chawed Ear, but everybody that lived along the road had run into their cabins and bolted the door, and they shot at us through the winders as we rode by. Bill said irritably, after having his off ear nicked by a buffalo rival, he says, "Turn it, they must know we aim to steal their school teacher." "Oh, they couldn't know that," I says. "I bet they's a war between Chawed Ear and Warpaint." "Oh, what are they shooting at me for, then?" demanded Joshua. "How could they recognize you in that rig?" I asked. "What's that?" Ahead of us, away down the road, we seen a cloud of dust, and here come a gang of men on hosses, waving guns and yelling. "Well, whatever the reason is," says Bill, "we better not stop to find out. Them gents is out for blood, and," says he as the bullets began to knock up the dust around us, "I judge it's our blood." pull into the bresh,' says I. 'I goes to chaw deer in spite of hell, high water, and all the gunmen they can raise.' So we taken to the bresh, and they lit in after us, about 40 or 50 of 'em. But we dodged and circled and taken shortcuts old Joshua knowed about, and when we emerged into the town of Chaudiere, our pursuers weren't nowheres in sight. In fact, they weren't nobody in sight. All the doors was closed and the shutters up on the cabins and saloons and stores and everything. It was peculiar. As we rode into the clearing, somebody let bam at us with a shotgun from the nearest cabin, and the load combed Joshua's whiskers. This made me mad, so I rode at the cabin and pulled my foot out in the stirrup and kicked the door in. And whilst I was doing this, the feller inside hollered and jumped out the winder, and Bill grabbed him by the neck. It was Esau Barlow, one of Chaudiere's confirmed citizens. "What the hell's the matter with you buzzards?" roared Bill. "Is that you, Glanton?" gasped Esau, blinking his eyes. "Of course it's me," roared Bill. "Do I look like a Injun?" "Yes. Ow! I didn't know you in that there turban," says Esau. "Am I dreaming, or is that Josh Braxton and Breck Elkins?" "Sure it's us," snorted Joshua. "Who you think?" "Well," says Esau, rubbing his neck and looking sideways at Joshua's painter skin, "I didn't know. Where is everybody?" Joshua demanded. "Well," says Esau, "a little while ago Dick Lynch rode into town with his hoss all of a lather and swore he'd just outrun the wildest war party that ever come down from the hills. 'Boys,' says Dick, 'they ain't neither Injuns nor white men. They're wild men, that's what. One of 'em's big as a grizzly bar with no shirt on, and he's riding a hoss bigger'n a bull moose. One of the others is as ragged and ugly as him, but not so big and wearing a patchy headdress. T'other's got nothing on but a painter's hide and a club, and his hair and whiskers falls to his shoulders. When they seen me,' says Dick, 'they sot up awful yells and come for me like a gang of man-eating cannibals. I've fogged it for town,' says Dick, 'warning everybody along the road to fort themselves in their cabins.' Well," says Esau, "when he says that, such men as was left in town got their hosses and guns, and they taken out up the road to meet the war party before it got into town." "Well, of all the fools," I says. "Say, where's the new teacher?" "The stage ain't arrived yet," says he. "The mayor and the band rode out to meet it at the Yaller Creek crossing and escort her into town in honor. They left before Dick brung news of the war party." "Come on," I says to my warriors. "We likewise meets that stage." So we fogged it on through the town and down the road, and pretty soon we heard music blaring ahead of us, and men yipping and shooting off their pistols like they does when they're celebrating. So we jedged they'd met the stage and was escorting it in. "What you gonna do now?" asked Bill, and about that time a noise bust out behind us, and we looked back and seen that gang of Chaudiere maniacs which had been chasing us, dusting down the road after us, waving their Winchesters. I knowed there weren't no use try to explain to 'em we weren't no war party of cannibals. They'd salivate us before we could get close enough to make 'em hear what we was saying. So I yelled, "Come on! If they get her into town, they'll fort theirselves agin us. We takes her now. Foller me." So we swept down the road and around the bend, and there was that stagecoach coming up the road with the mayor riding alongside with his hat in his hand and a whiskey bottle sticking out of each saddlebag and his hip pocket. He was orating at the top of his voice to make himself heard above the racket the band was making. They was blowing horns and banging drums and twanging on Jews' harps,
and the hosses was skittish and shyin' and jumping. But we heard the mayor say, "And so we welcomes you, Miss Devon, to our peaceful little community where life runs smooth and tranquil and men's souls is overflowin' with milk and honey." And just then we stormed around the bend and come tearing down on 'em with the mob right behind us, yelling and cussing and shooting, free and fervent. The next minute they was the damnedest mix-up you ever seen. What with the hosses bucking their riders off, men yelling and cussing, the hosses hitched to the stage running away and knocking the mayor off'n his hoss. We hit 'em like a cyclone, and they shot at us and hit us over the head with their music horns. And right in the middle of the fray, the mob behind us rounded the bend and piled up amongst us before they could check their hosses, and everybody was so confused they started fighting everybody else. Nobody knowed what it was all about except me and my warriors. But Chaudeer's motto is, "When in doubt, shoot." So they laid into us and into each other, free and hearty. And we was far from idle. Old Joshua was laying out his fellow townsmen right and left with his elm club, saving Chaudeer from education in spite of itself. And Glanton was beating the band over their heads with his six-shooter, and I was trampling folks in my rush for the stage. The fool hosses had whirled around and started in the general direction of the Atlantic Ocean, and the driver and the shotgun guard couldn't stop 'em. But Captain Kidd overtook it in maybe a dozen strides, and I left the saddle in a flying leap and landed on it. The guard tried to shoot me with his shotgun, so I throwed it into an alder clump, and he didn't let go of it quick enough, so he went along with it. I then grabbed the ribbons out of the driver's hands and swung them fool horses around on their hind legs, and the stage kind of revolved on one wheel for a dizzy instant and then settled down again, and we headed back up the road lickety-split, and in an instant was right amongst the fracas that was going on around Bill and Joshua. About that time I noticed that the driver was trying to stab me with a butcher knife, so I kind of tossed him off the stage, and there ain't no sense in him going around threatening to have me arrested account of him landing head first in the base horn, so it taken 7 men to pull him out. He ought to watch where he falls when he gets throwed off of a stage going at a high run. I also feels that the mayor is prone to carry petty grudges, or he wouldn't be so bitter about me accidentally running over him with all 4 wheels. And it ain't my fault he was stepped on by Captain Kidd neither. Captain Kidd was just following the stage 'cause he knowed I was on it, and it naturally irritates him to stumble over somebody, and that's why he chawed the mayor's ear. As for them other fellers which happened to get knocked down and run over by the stage, I didn't have nothing personal agin 'em. I was just rescuing Joshua and Bill, which was outnumbered about 20 to 1. I was doing them Chaudeer idiots a favor, if they only knowed it, because in about another minute Bill would have started using the front ends of his 6-shooters instead of the butts, and the fight would have turned into a massacre. Bill has got a awful temper. Him and Joshua had did the enemy considerable damage, but the battle was going agin 'em when I arriv on the field of carnage. As the stage crashed through the mob, I reached down and got Joshua by the neck and pulled him out from under about 15 men which was beaten him to death with their gun butts and pulling out his whiskers by the handfuls. And I slung him up on top of the other luggage. About that time we was rushing past the dog pile which Bill was the center of, and I reached down and snared him as we went by. But 3 of the men which had hold of him wouldn't let go, so I hauled all 4 of 'em up onto the stage. I then handled the team with one hand and used the other to pull them idiots loose from Bill like pulling ticks off'n a cow's hide, then throwed them at the mob which was chasing us.
Men and hosses piled up in a stack on the road, which was further messed up by Captain Kidd plowing through it as he come busting along after the stage. And by the time we sighted Chawed Ear again, our enemies was far behind us, though still rambunctious. We tore through Chawed Ear in a fog of dust, and the women and children which had ventured out of their shacks squalled and run back again, though they weren't in no danger. But Chawed Ear folks is peculiar that way. When we was out of sight of Chawed Ear, I give the lines to Bill and swung down the side of the stage and stuck my head in. They was one of the purtiest gals I ever seen in there, all huddled up in a corner and looking so pale and scared I was afraid she was going to faint, which I'd heard Eastern gals has a habit of doing. "Oh, spare me!" she begged. "Please don't scalp me." "Be at ease, Miss Devon," I reassured her. "I ain't no Injun, nor no wild man neither. Neither is my friends here. We wouldn't none of us hurt a flea. We're that refined and soft-hearted you wouldn't believe it." At that instant a wheel hit a stump and the stage jumped into the air, and I bit my tongue and roared in some irritation. "Bill, you condemned son of a striped polecat, stop this stage before I comes up there and breaks your cussed neck." "Try, you beef-headed lummox," he invites. But he pulled up the hosses, and I'd taken off my hat and opened the door. Bill and Joshua clumb down and peered over my shoulder. Miss Devon looked tolerable sick. Maybe it was something she ate. "Miss Devon," I says, "I begs your pardon for this here informal welcome, but you sees before you a man whose heart bleeds for the benighted state of his native community. I'm Breckinridge Elkins of Bear Creek, where hearts is pure and motives is lofty, but culture is weak. You sees before you," says I, growing more enthusiastic about education the longer I looked at them big brown eyes of hern, "a man which is growed up in ignorance. I can't neither read nor write. Joshua here in the painter skin, he can't neither, and neither can Bill." "That's a lie," says Bill. "I can read and—" I kind of stuck my elbow in his stomach. I didn't want him to spoil the effect of my speech. Miss Devon was getting some of her color back. "Miss Devon," I says, "will you please, ma'am, come up to Bear Creek and be our school teacher?" "Why," says she bewilderedly, "I came west expecting to teach at Chawed Ear, but I haven't signed any contract, and—" "How much was them snake hunters going to pay you?" I asked. $90 a month," says she. "We pays you 100, I says, "board and lodging free." "Hell's fire," says Bill. "They never was that much hard cash money on Bear Creek. We all donates coon hides and corn liquor," I snapped. "I sells the stuff in war paint and hands the dough to Miss Devon. Will you keep your snout out of my business?" "But what will the people of Chawed Ear say?" she wonders. "Nothing," I told her heartily. "I'll tend to them." "It seems so strange and irregular," says she weakly. "I don't know." "Then it's settled," I says. "Great! Let's go." "Where?" she gasped, grabbing hold of the stage as I clumb into the seat. "Bear Creek," I says. "Varmints and hoss thieves hunt the brush. Culture is on her way to Bear Creek." And we went fogging it down the road as fast as the horses could hump it. Once I looked back at Miss Devon and seen her getting pale again, so I yelled above the clatter of the wheels, "Don't be scared, Miss Devon. Ain't nothing gonna hurt you. B. Elkins is on the job to protect you, and I aim to be at your side from now on." At this she said something I didn't understand. In fact, it sounded like a low moan. Then I heard Joshua say to Bill, hollering to make himself heard, "Education, my eye! The big chump's looking for a wife, that's what. 10 to 1 she gives him the mitten." "I takes that bawled Bill, and I bellered, "Shet up that noise! Quit discussin' my private business so dern public. What's that?" It sounded like firecrackers popping back down the road. Bill yelled, "Holy smoke, it's them chawed-ear maniacs. They're still on our trail and they're gaining on us." Cussing heartily, I poured leather onto them fool hosses, and just then we hit the mouth of the Bear Creek trail and I swung onto it. They'd never been a wheel on that trail before, and the going was tolerable rough. It was all Bill and Joshua could do to keep from getting throwed off, and they was seldom more'n one wheel on the ground at a time. Naturally, the mob gained on us, and when we roared up into Bowie Knife Pass, they weren't more'n a quarter-mile behind us, whooping bodacious. I pulled up the hosses beside the tree where Jack Sprag was still tied up. He gawped at Miss Devon, and she gawped back at him. "Listen," I says, "here's a lady in distress which we're rescuing from teaching school and chawed ear. A mob's right behind us. This ain't no time to think about yourself. Will you postpone your suicide if I turned you loose, and get onto the stage and take the young lady up the trail while the rest of us turn back the mob?" "I will," says he with more enthusiasm than he'd showed since we stopped him from hanging himself. So I cut him loose and he clumb onto the stage. "Drive on to Kiowa Canyon," I told him as he picked up the lines. "Wait for us there. Don't be scared, Miss Devon. I'll soon be with you. B. Elkins never fails a lady fair." "Yup," says Jack, and the stage went clattering and banging up the trail, and me and Joshua and Bill taking cover among the big rocks that was on either side of the trail. The pass was just a narrow gorge, and a lovely place for an ambush, as I remarked. Well, here they come, howling up the steep slope, yelling and spurring and shooting wild, and me and Bill give 'em a salute with our pistols. The charge halted plumb sudden. They knowed they was licked. They couldn't get at us because they couldn't climb the cliffs. So after firing a volley which damaged nothing but the atmosphere, they turned around and hightailed it back towards Chawed Ear. "I hope that's a lesson to 'em," says I as I riz. "Come, I can't wait to get culture started on Bear Creek." "You can't wait to get sparking that gal," snorted Joshua, but I ignored him and forked Cap'n Kidd and headed up the trail, and him and Bill follered, riding double on Jack Spragg's horse. "Why should I deny my honorable intentions?" I says presently. "Anyone can see Miss Devon is already learning to love me. If Jack had my attraction for the fair sex, he wouldn't be lugging around a ruined life. Hey, where's the stage?" Because we'd reached Kiowa Canyon, and they weren't no stage. "Here's a note stuck on a tree," says Bill. "I'll read it." "Well, for Lord's sake," he yelped, "listen to this. Dear boys, I've decided I ain't gonna hang myself, and Miss Devon has decided she don't want to teach school at Bear Creek. Breck gives her the willies. She ain't altogether sure he's human. With me it's love at first sight, and she's scairt if she don't marry somebody Breck will marry her, and she says I'm the best looking prospect she's saw so far. So we're heading for war paint to get married. Yours truly, Jack Sprag." "Oh, don't take it like that," says Bill, as I give a maddened howl and impulsively commenced to rip up all the saplings in Wretch. "You've saved his life and brung him happiness." "And what have I brung me?" I yelled, tearing the limbs off a oak in an effort to relieve my feelings. "Culture on Bear Creek is shot to hell, and my honest love has been betrayed. Bill Glanton, the next ranny you chase up into the Humboldts to commit suicide, he don't have to worry about getting bumped off. I attends to it myself. Personal." End of Sharp's Gun Serenade.
Texas John Alden by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Texas John Alden by Robert Howard. I hear the citizens of Warhoop has organized theirselves into a committee of public safety, which they says is to protect the town agin me, Breckinridge Elkins. Sech doin's as that irritates me. You'd think I was a public menace or something. I'm pretty dern tired of their slanders. I didn't tear down their cussed jail. The buffalo hunters done it. How could I when I was in it at the time? As for the Silver Boots Saloon and Dance Hall, it wouldn't have got shot up if the owner'd showed any sense. It was Ace Middleton's own fault he got his hind leg busted in 3 places, and if the city marshal had been tending to his own business instead of persecuting a poor, helpless stranger, he wouldn't have got the seat of his britches full of buckshot. Folks which says I went to Warhoop a purpose to wreck the town is liars. I never had no idea at first of going there at all. It's off the railroad and infested with tin-horn gamblers and buffalo hunters and such like varmints, and no place for a trail driver. My visit to this lair of vice came about like this. I'd rode point on a herd of longhorns clean from the lower Pecos to Goshen, where the railroad was, and I stayed there after the trail boss and the other boys headed south to spark the belle of the town, Betty Wilkinson, which gal was as purty as a brand new bowie knife. She seemed to like me middlin' tolerable, but I had rivals, notably a snub-nosed Arizona waddy by the name of Biz Ridgway. This varmint's persistence was so plumb aggravatin' that I come in on him sudden-like one mornin' in the back room of the Spanish Mustang in Goshen, and I says, "Listen here, you sandburr in the pants of progress. I'm a peaceable man, generous and retirin' to a fault, but I'm reachin' the limit of my endurance. Ain't they no gals in Arizona that you gotta come pesterin' mine? Why don't you go on back home where you belong anyhow? I'm askin' you like a gent to keep away from Betty Wilkinson before something unpleasant is forced to happen to you." He kind of reared up and says, "I ain't the only gent which is sparkin' Betty. Why don't you make war talk with Rudwell Shapley, Jr.?" "He ain't nothing but a puddin'-headed tenderfoot," I responded coldly. "I don't consider him in no serious light. A gal with as much sense as Betty wouldn't pay him no mind. But you got a slick tongue and might snake your way ahead of me, so I'm tellin' you." He started to get up in a hurry, and I reached for my bowie. But then he sunk back down in his chair, and to my amazement he busted into tears. "What in thunder's the matter with you?" I demanded, shocked. "Woe is me!" moaned he. "You're right, Brack. I got no business hanging around Betty, but I didn't know she was your gal. I ain't got no matrimonial intention onto her. I'm just kind of consolin' myself with her company whilst being parted by cruel fate from my own true love." "Hey," I says, pricking up my ears and uncocking my pistol. "You ain't in love with Betty? You got another gal?" "A picture of divine beauty," vowed he, wiping his eyes on my bandanner. "Gloria Lavenner, which sings in the Silver Boot over to Warhoop. We was to wed." Here his emotions overcome him, and he sobbed loudly. "But fate interfered," he moaned. "I was banished from Warhoop, never to return.
In a thoughtless moment, I kind of pushed a bartender with a claw hammer, and he had a stroke of apoplexy or something and died, and they blamed me. I was forced to flee without telling my true love where I was going. I ain't dared to go back because them folks over there is so prejudiced agin me, they threatens to arrest me on sight. My true love is eating her heart out, waiting for me to come and claim her as my bride, whilst I lives here in exile." Biz then wept bitterly on my shoulder, till I throwed him off in some embarrassment. "Why don't you write her a letter, you dad-blamed fool?" I asked. "I can't write nor read neither," he said, "and I don't trust nobody to send word to her by. She's so beautiful, the critter I'd send would probably fall in love with her hisself, the low-down polecat." Suddenly he grabbed my hand with both of his'n and said, "Breck, you got an honest face, and I never did believe all they say about you anyway. Why don't you go and tell her?" "I'll do better than that if it'll keep you away from Betty," I says. "I'll bring this gal over here to Goshen." "You're a gent," says he, wringing my hand. "I wouldn't entrust nobody else with such a sacred mission. Just go to the Silver Boot and tell Ace Middleton you want to see Gloria Lavender alone." "All right," I said. "I'll rent a buckboard to bring her back in." "I'll be counting the hours till you heaves over the horizon with my true love," declaimed he, reaching for the whiskey bottle. So I hustled out, and who should I run into but that poor sappified shrimp of a Rudwell Shapley Jr., in his monkey jacket and tight riding pants and varnished English boots. We like to had a collision as I barged through the swinging doors, and he squeaked and staggered back and hollered, "Don't shoot!" "Who said anything about shooting?" I asked irritably, and he kind of got his color back and looked me over like I was a sideshow or something, like he always done. "Your home," says he, "is a long way from here, is it not, Mr. Elkins?" "Yeah," I said. "I live on Wolf Mountain, way down near where the Pecos runs into the Rio Grande." "Indeed," he said kind of hopefully. "I suppose you'll be returning soon?" "Nah, I ain't," I says. "I'll probably stay here all fall." "Oh," says he dejectedly, and went off looking like someone had kicked him in the pants. I wondered why he should get so down in the mouth just because I weren't going home. But them tenderfoots ain't got no sense, and they ain't no use wasting time trying to figure out why they does things, 'cause they generally don't know theirselves. For instance, why should an object like Rudwell Shapley Jr. come to Goshen, I wanted to know. I asked him once, point blank, and he says it was a primitive urge to see life in the raw, whatever that means. I thought maybe he was talking about grub, but the cook at the Laramie restaurant says he takes his beefsteaks well done like the rest of us. Well, anyway, I got onto my hoss, Captain Kidd, and pulled for Warhoop, which laid some miles west of Goshen. I weren't wasting no time, because the quicker I got Gloria Lavender to Goshen, the quicker I'd have a clear field with Betty. Of course, it would have been easier and quicker just to shoot Biz, but I didn't know how Betty'd take it. Women is funny that way. I figured to eat dinner at the Halfway House, a tavern which stood on the prairie about halfway between Goshen and Warhoop. But as I approached it, I met a most peculiar-looking object heading east. I presently recognized it as a cowboy named Tump Garrison, and he looked like he'd been through a sorghum mill. His hat brim was pulled loose from the crown and hung around his neck like a collar. His clothes hung in rags. His face was skint all over, and one ear showed signs of having been chawed on long and earnestly. "Where was the tornado?" I asked, pulling up. He gave me a suspicious look out of the eye he could still see with.
"Oh, it's you, Breck," he says then. "My brains is so addled I didn't recognize you at first. In fact," says he, tenderly caressing a lump on his head the size of a turkey egg, "it's just a few minutes ago I managed to remember my own name." "What happened?" I asked with interest. "I ain't sure," says he, spitting out 2 or 3 loose tushes. "Leastwise, I ain't sure just what happened after that there table leg was shattered over my head. Things is a little foggy after that, but up to that time my memory is flawless. Briefly, Breck," says he, rising in his stirrups to rub his pants where they was the print of a boot heel, "I diskivered that I warn't welcome at the halfway house, and big as you be, I advises you to avoid it like you would the yaller jandis." "It's a public tavern," I says. "It was," says he, working his right leg to see if it was still in joint. "It was till Moose Harrison, the buffalo hunter, arrove there to hold a private celebration of his own. He don't like cattle, nor them which handles 'em. He told me so hisself, just before he hit me with the bung starter. He said he weren't aimin' to be pestered by no dern Texas cattle pushers whilst he's enjoyin' a little relaxation. It was just after issuing this statement that he throwed me through the roulette wheel." "You ain't from Texas," I said. "You're from the Nations." "That's what I told him whilst he was doing a war dance on my brisket," says Tump. "But he said he was too broad-minded to bother with technicalities. Anyway, he says cowboys was the plague of the range, irregardless of where they come from." "Oh, he did he?" I says irritably. "Well, I ain't hunting trouble. I'm on a errand of mercy. But he better not shoot off his big mouth to me. I eats my dinner at the halfway house, regardless of all the buffalo hunters north of the Cimarron." "I'd give $1 to see the fun," says Tump, "but my other eye's closing fast, and I got to get amongst friends." So he pulled for Goshen, and I rode on to the halfway house, where I seen a big bay hoss tied to the hitch rack. I watered Cap'n Kidd and went in. "Sst!" the bartender says. "Get out quick as you can. Moose Harrison's asleep in the back room." "I'm hungry," I responded, setting down at a table which stood nigh the bar. "Bring me a steak with pertaters and onions and a quart of coffee and a can of clean peaches, and whilst the stuff's cooking, give me 9 or 10 bottles of beer to wash the dust out of my gullet." "Listen," says the barkeep. "Reflect and consider. You're young and life is sweet. Don't you know that Moose Harrison is pison to anything that looks like a cowpuncher? When he's on a whiskey tear, as at present, he's more painter than human. He's killed more men—" "Will you stop blattin' and bring me my rations?" I requested. He shakes his head sad-like and says, "Well, all right. After all, it's your hide. At least try not to make no racket. He swore to have the lifeblood of anybody which wakes him up." I said I didn't want no trouble with nobody, and he tiptoed back to the kitchen and whispered my order to the cook, then brung me 9 or 10 bottles of beer and slipped back behind the bar and watched me with morbid fascination. I drunk the beer, and whilst drinking I got to kind of brooding about Moose Harrison having the nerve to order everybody to keep quiet whilst he slept. But they're liars which claims I throwed the empty bottles at the door in the back room, a purpose to wake Harrison up. When the waiter brung my grub, I wanted to clear the table to make room for it, so I just kind of tossed the bottles aside, and could I help it if they all busted on the back room door?
Was it my fault that Harrison was such a light sleeper? But the bartender moaned and ducked down behind the bar, and the waiter run through the kitchen and followed the cook in a sprint across the prairie, and a most remarkable beller burst forth from the back room. The next instant the door was tore off the hinges, and the enormous human came bulging into the barroom. He wore buckskins, his whiskers bristled, and his eyes was red as a drunk Comanche's.
"What in tarnation?"
remarked he in a voice which cracked the window panes.
"Does my gall-blasted eyes deceive me? Is that there a cussed cow-puncher sitting there wolfing beefsteak as brash as if he was a white man?"
"You ride herd on them insults," I roared, rising sudden, and his eyes kind of popped when he seen I was about 3 inches taller than him. "I got as much right here as you have."
"Name your weapons,"
blustered he. He had a butcher knife and 2 6-shooters on his belt.
"Name 'em yourself," I snorted.
"If you think you're such a hell whizzer at fist and skull, why shuck your weapon belt and I'll claw your ears off with my bare hands."
"That suits me," says he. "I'll festoon that bar with your innards."
And he takes hold of his belt like he was going to unbuckle it. Then quick as a flash he whipped out a gun. But I was watching for that, and my right hand .45 banged just as his muzzle cleared leather. The barkeep stuck his head up from behind the bar.
"Heck," he says, wild-eyed. "You beat Moose Harrison to the draw, and him with the edge. I wouldn't have believed it was possible if I hadn't saw it. But his friends'll ride your trail for this."
"Warn't it self-defense?" I demanded.
"A clear case," says he. "But that won't mean nothing to them wild and woolly buffalo skinners. You better get back to Goshen where you got friends."
"I got business in Warhoop," I says. "Dang it, my coffee's cold. Dispose of the carcass and heat it up, will you?" So he drug Harrison out, cussing 'cause he was so heavy, claiming I ought to help him. But I told him it weren't my tavern. I also refused to pay for a decanter which Harrison's wild shot had busted. He got mad and said he hoped the buffalo hunters did hang me. But I told him they'd have to catch me without my guns first, and I slept with 'em on. Then I finished my dinner and pulled for Warhoop. It was about sundown when I got there, and I was pretty hungry again. But I aimed to see Biz's gal before I done anything else. So I put my hoss in the livery stable and seen he had a big feed. Then I headed for the Silver Boot, which is the biggest joint in town. There was plenty hilarity going on, but I seen no cowboys. The revelers was mostly gamblers, or buffalo hunters, or soldiers, or freighters. Warhoop weren't popular with cattlemen. There weren't no buyers or loading pens there, and for pleasure it weren't nigh as good a town as Goshen anyway. I asked the barman where Ace Middleton was, and he pointed out a big feller with a generous tummy, decorated with a fancy vest and a gold watch chain about the size of a trace chain. He wore mighty handsome clothes and a diamond horseshoe stick pin and waxed mustache. So I went up to him. He looked me over with very little favor.
"Oh, a cowpuncher, eh? Well, your money's as good as anybody's. Enjoy yourself, but don't get wild."
"I ain't aiming to get wild," I says. "I want to see Gloria Lavenner." When I says that, he give a convulsive start and choked on his cigar. Everybody nigh us stopped laughing and talking and turned to watch us.
"What did you say?"
he gurgled, gagging up the cigar.
"Did I honestly hear you asking to see Gloria Lavenner?"
"Sure," I says. "I aim to take her back to Goshen to get married."
"You deleted expletive,"
says he, and grabbed up a table and broke off a leg and hit me over the head with it. It was most unexpected and took me plumb off guard.
I hadn't no idea what he was busting the table up for, and I was too surprised to duck. If it hadn't been for my Stetson, it might have cracked my head. As it was, it knocked me back into the crowd, but before I could get my balance, 3 or 4 bouncers grabbed me and somebody jerked my pistol out of the scabbard. "Throw him out!" roared Ace, acting like a wild man. He was plumb purple in the face. "Steal my girl, will he? Hold him while I bust him in the snoot." He then rushed up and hit me very severely in the nose, whilst them bouncers was holding my arms. Well, up to that time I hadn't made no resistance. I was too astonished. But this was going too far, even if Ace was loco, as it appeared. Nobody weren't holding my legs, so I kicked Ace in the stomach, and he curled up on the floor with a strangled shriek. I then started spurring them bouncers in the legs, and they yelled and let go of me, and somebody hit me in the ear with a blackjack. That made me mad, so I reached for my bowie and my boot, but a big red-headed maverick kicked me in the face when I stooped down. That straightened me up, so I hit him on the jaw, and he fell down across Ace, which was holding his stomach and trying to yell for the city marshal. Some low-minded scoundrel got a stranglehold around my neck from behind and started beating me on the head with a pair of brass knucks. I ducked and throwed him over my head. Then I kicked out backwards and knocked over a couple more. But a scar-faced thug with a baseball bat got in a full-armed lick about that time, and I went to my knees feeling like my skull was dislocated. 6 or 7 of 'em then throwed theirselves onto me with howls of joy, and I seen I'd have to use violence in spite of myself. So I drawed my bowie and started cutting my way through 'em. They couldn't let go of me quicker if I'd been a cougar. They scattered every which way, splattering blood and howling blue murder, and I riz rarin' and rampacious. Somebody shot at me just then, and I wheeled to locate him when a man run in at the door and pointed a pistol at me. Before I could sling my knife through him, which was my earnest intention, he hollered, "Drop your deadly weapon! I'm the city marshal and you're under arrest." "What for?" I demanded. "I ain't done nothing." "Nothing," says Ace Middleton fiercely, as his menials lifted him onto his feet. "You've just sliced pieces out of 5 or 6 of our leading citizens, and here's my head bouncer, Red Krogan, out cold with a busted jaw, to say nothing of pushing my stomach through my spine. Ow! You must have mule blood in you, blast your soul! Sentry," he ordered the marshal. "He came in here drunk and raging and threatening, and started a fight for nothing. Do your duty. Arrest the cussed outlaw." Well, Pap always tells me not to never resist no officer of the law. And anyway, the marshal had my gun, and so many people was hollering and cussing and talking, it kind of confused me. When they's any thinking to be did, I like to have a quiet place to do it in plenty of time. So the first thing I knowed, Santry had handcuffs on me, and he hauls me off down the street with a big crowd follering, making remarks which is supposed to be funny. They come to a log hut with bars on the back winder, take off the handcuffs, shove me in, and lock the door. There I was in jail without even seeing Gloria Lavender. It was plumb disgustful. The crowd all hustled back to the Silver Boot to watch them fellers get sewed up which had fell afoul of my bowie, all but one fat cuss which said he was a guard, and he sat down in the front of the jail with a double-barreled shotgun across his lap and went to sleep. Well, there weren't nothing in the jail but a bunk with a hoss blanket on it and a wooden bench. The bunk was too short for me to sleep on with any comfort, being built for a 6-foot man, so I sat down on it and waited for someone to bring me some grub. So after a while the marshal come and looked in at the winder and cussed me. "It's a good thing for you," he says, "that you didn't kill none of them fellers. As it is, maybe we won't hang you." "You won't have to hang me if you don't bring me some grub pretty soon," I says. "Are you gonna let me starve in this dern jail?" "We don't
encourage crime in our town by feeding criminals," he says. "If you want grub, give me the money to buy it with." I told him I didn't have but $5 and I thought I'd pay my fine with that. He said $5 wouldn't begin to pay my fine, so I give him the 5 spot to buy grub with, and he took it and went off. I waited and waited, but he didn't come. I hollered to the guard, but he kept on snoring. Then pretty soon someone said, "Psst," at the window. I went over and looked out, and they was a woman standing behind the jail. The moon had come up over the prairie as bright as day, and though she had a cloak with a hood throwed over her, by what I could see of her face she was awful purty. "I'm Gloria Lavender," says she. "I'm risking my life coming here, but I wanted to get a look at the man who was crazy enough to tell Ace Middleton he wanted to see me." "What's crazy about that?" I asked. "Don't you know Ace has killed 3 men already for trying to flirt with me?" says she. "Any man who can break Red Krogan's jaw like you did must be a bearcat. But it was sheer madness to tell Ace you wanted to marry me." "Aw, he never give me time to explain about that," I says. "It warn't me which wants to marry you. But what business is it of Middleton's? This here's a free country." "That's what I thought till I started working for him," she says bitterly. "He fell in love with me, and he's so insanely jealous he won't let anyone even speak to me. He keeps me practically a prisoner and watches me like a hawk. I can't get away from him. Nobody in town dares to help me. They won't even rent me a horse at the livery stable. You see, Ace owns most of the town, and lots of people are in debt to him. The rest are afraid of him. I guess I'll have to spend the rest of my life under his thumb," she says despairfully. "You won't neither," I says. "As soon as I can get word to my friends in Goshen to send me a loan to pay my fine and get me out of this fool jail, I'll take you to Goshen where your true love is pining for you." "My true love?" says she, kind of startled like. "What do you mean?" "Biz Ridgway is in Goshen," I says. "He don't dare come after you hisself, so he sent me to fetch you." She didn't say nothing for a spell, and then she spoke kind of breathless. "All right. I must get back to the Silver Boot now, or Ace will miss me and start looking for me. I'll find Santry and pay your fine tonight. When he lets you out, come to the back door of the Silver Boot and wait in the alley. I'll come to you there as soon as I can slip away." So I said all right, and she went away. The guard sitting in front of the jail with his shotgun across his knees hadn't never woke up. But he did wake up about 15 minutes after she left. A gang of men came up the street, whooping and cussing, and he jumped to his feet. "Curses! Here comes Brant Hansen and the mob of them buffler hunters, and they got a rope. They're heading for the jail." "Who do you reckon they're after?" I inquired. "They ain't nobody in jail but you," he suggested pointedly. "And in about a minute they ain't gonna be nobody nigh it but you and them. When Hansen and his bunch is in liquor, they don't care who they shoots." He then laid down his shotgun and lit a shuck down a back alley as hard as he could leg it. So about a dozen buffalo hunters in buckskins and whiskers come surging up to the jail and kicked on the door. They couldn't get the door open, so they went around behind the shack and looked in at the winder. "It's him, all right," says one of them. "Let's shoot him through the winder." But the other said, "Nah, let's do the job in proper order." And I asked them what they wanted. "We aims to hang you," they answered enthusiastically. "You can't do that," I says. "It's agin the law." "You killed Moose Harrison," said the biggest one, which they called Hansen. Well, it was an even break, and he tried to get the drop on me, I says. Then Hansen says, "Enough of such quibbling. We've made up our mind to hang you, so let's don't hear no more arguments about it. Here," he says to his pals, "tie a rope to the bars and we'll jerk the whole winder out. It'll be easier than busting down the door. And hustle up, 'cause I'm in a hurry to get back to that poker game at the Rare and Buffalo."
So they tied a rope onto the bars and all laid onto it and heaved and grunted. Some of the bars come loose at one end. I picked up the bench, aiming to bust their fool skulls with it as they clumb through the winder, but just then another feller run up. "Wait, boys!" he hollered. "Don't waste your muscle. I just seen Santry down at the Topeka Queen gambling with the money he'd taken off that derned cowboy, and he give me the key to the door." So they abandoned the winder and surged round to the front of the jail, and I quickly propped the bench agin the door, and run to the winder and tore out them bars which is already loose. I could hear 'em rattling at the door, and as I clumb through the winder, one of 'em said, "The lock's turned, but the door's stuck. Heave agin it." So whilst they heave, I run around the jail and pick up the guard's shotgun where he dropped it when he run off. Just then the bench give way inside and the door flew open, and all them fellers tried to crowd through. As a result, they was all jammed up in the door and cussing something fierce. "Quit crowding!" yelled Hansen. "Holy catamount, he's gone! The jail's empty!" I then up with my shotgun and give 'em both barrels in the seat of their britches, which was the handiest to aim at, and they let out a most amazing squall and busted loose and fell head first into the jail. Some of 'em kept on going head down like they'd started and hit the back wall so hard it knocked 'em stiff, and the others fell over 'em. They was all tangled up in a pile, cussing and yelling to beat the devil. So I slammed the door and locked it and run around behind the jailhouse. Hansen was trying to climb out the winder, so I hit him over the head with my shotgun and he fell back inside and hollered, "Help! I'm mortally injured!" "Shet up that unseemly clamor," I said sternly. "Ain't none of you hurt bad. Throw your guns out the winder and lay down on the floor. Hustle, before I gives you another blast through the winder." They didn't know the shotgun was empty, so they throwed their weapons out in a hurry and laid down, but they weren't quiet about it. They seemed to consider they'd been subjected to cruel and unusual treatment, and the birdshot in their sterns must have been a stingin' right smart, because the language they used was plumb painful to hear. I stuck a couple of their pistols in my belt. "If one of you shows his head at that winder within an hour," I says, "he'll get it blowed off." I then snuck back into the shadders and headed for the livery stable. The livery stable man was reading a newspaper by a lantern, and he looked surprised and said he thought I was in jail. I ignored this remark and told him to hitch me a fast hoss to a buckboard whilst I saddled Captain Kidd. "Wait a minute," says he. "I hear tell you told Ace Middleton you aimed to elope with Gloria Lavender. You taking this rig for her?" "Yes, I am," I says. "Well, I'm a friend of Middleton's," he says, "and I won't rent you no rig under no circumstances." "Then get out of my way," I said. "I'll hitch the hoss up myself." He then drawed a buoy, so I clinched with him, and as we was wrastling around he sort of knocked his head against a swingle tree I happened to have in my hand at the time, and collapses with a low gurgle. So I tied him up and rolled him under an oats bin. I also rolled out a buckboard and hitched the best looking harness hoss I could find to it. And them folks is liars which is going around saying I stole that there outfit. It was sent back later. I saddles my hoss and tied him on behind the buckboard and got in and started for the Silver Boot, wondering how long it'd take them fool buffalo hunters to find out I was just bluffing and weren't lying out behind the jail to shoot 'em as they climbed out. I turned into the alley which run behind the Silver Boot, then tied the hosses and went up to the back door and peeked in. Gloria was there. She grabbed me and I could feel her trembling. "I thought you'd never come," she whispered. "It'll be time for my singing act again in just a few minutes. I've been waiting here ever since I paid Santry your fine. What kept you so long? He left the Silver Boot as soon as I gave him money." "He never turned me out, the low-down skunk," I muttered. "Some friends got me out. Come on, get in the buckboard." I helped her up and give her the lines. "I got a debt to settle before I leave town," I said. "You go on and wait for me at that clump of cottonwoods east of town. I'll be on pretty soon." So she pulled out in a hurry, and I got on to Captain Kidd. I rode him around to the front of the Silver Boot, tied him to the hitch rack, and dismounted. The Silver Boot was crowded. I could see Ace strutting around, chawing a big black cigar, and joking and slapping folks on the back. Everybody was having such a hilarious time, nobody noticed me as I stood in the barway. So I pulled the Buffalo Hunter's .45s and let bam at the mirror behind the bar. The barman yelped and ducked the flying glass, and everybody whirled and gaped, and Ace jerked his cigar out of his mouth and bawled, "It's that darn cowpuncher again! Get him!" But them bouncers had seen my guns, and they was shying away, all except the scar-faced thug which had hit me with the bat, and he whipped a gun from under his vest. So I shot him through the right shoulder, and he fell over behind the monte table. I begun to spray the crowd with hot lead, free and generous, and they stampeded every which way. Some went through the winder, glass and all, and some went out the side doors, and some busted down the back door in their flight. I likewise riddled the mirror behind the bar, and shot down some of the hanging lamps and busted most of the bottles on the shelves. Ace ducked behind a stack of beer kegs and opened fire on me, but he showed poor judgment in not noticing he was right under a hanging lamp. I shot it off the ceiling, and it fell down on his head, and you ought to have heard him holler when the burning aisle run down his worthless neck. He come prancing into the open, wiping his neck with one hand and trying to shoot me with the other, and I drilled him through the hind leg. He fell down and bellered like a bull with its tail cotched in a fence gate. "You darn murderer!" says he passionately. "I'll have your life for this!" "Shut up!" I snarled. "I'm just paying you back for all the pain and humiliation I suffered in this den of iniquity." At this moment a bartender riz up from behind a billiard table with a sawed-off shotgun, but I shot it out of his hands before he could cock it, and he fell over backwards hollering, "Spare my life!" Just then somebody yelled, "Halt, in the name of the law!" and I looked around and saw it was that tin-horn marshal named Santry with a gun in his hand. "I arrest you again," he bawled. "Lay down your weapons." "I'll lay your carcass down," I responded. "You ain't fittin' for to be no law officer. You gambled away the $5 I give you for grub, and you took the fine money Miss Laventer gave you, and didn't turn me out, and you give the key to them mobsters which wanted to hang me. You ain't no law. You're a dern outlaw yourself. Now you got a gun in your hand same as me. Either start shooting or throw it down." Well, he hollered, "Don't shoot," and throwed it down and hoisted his hands. I seen he had my knife and pistol stuck in his belt, so I took them off of him and tossed the .45s I'd been using onto the billiard table and said, "Give these back to the buffalo hunters." But just then he whipped out a .38 he was wearing under his arm and shot at me and knocked my hat off. Then he turned and run around the end of the bar, all bent over to get his head below it. So I grabbed the bartender's shotgun and let bam with both barrels just as his rear end was going out of sight. He shrieked blue ruin and started having a fit behind the bar. So I throwed the shotgun through the roulette wheel and stalked forth, leaving Ace and the bouncer and the marshal wailing and wallering on the floor. It was plumb disgustful the way they wept and cussed over their trifling injuries. I come out on the street so sudden that them cusses which was hiding behind the hoss trough to shoot me as I come out was took by surprise and only grazed me in a few places, so I throwed a few slugs amongst them and they took to their heels. I got on Captain Kidd and headed east down the street, ignoring the shots fired at me from the alleys and winders. That is, I ignored 'em except to shoot back at 'em as I run, and I reckon that's how the mayor got the lobe of his ear shot off. I thought I heard somebody holler when I answered a shot fired at me from behind the mayor's board fence. Well, when I got to the clump of cottonwoods, there weren't no sign of Gloria, the hoss, or the buckboard. But there was a note stuck up on a tree which I grabbed and read by the light of the moon. It said, "Dear Tejano, your friend must have been kidding you. I never even knew anybody named Biz Ridgway. But I'm taking this chance of getting away from Ace. I'm heading for Trevano Springs, and I'll send the buckboard back from there. Thank you for everything. Gloria Levenner." I got to Goshen about sunup, having loped all the way. Biz Ridgway was at the bar of the Spanish Mustang, and when he seen me he turned pale and dived for the winder, but I grabbed him. "What you mean by telling me that lie about you and Gloria Levenner?" I demanded. "Was you trying to get me killed?" "Well," says he, "to tell you the truth, Breck, I was. All's fair in love and war, you know. I wanted to get you out of the way so I'd have a clear field with Betty Wilkinson, and I knowed about Ace Middleton and Gloria and figured he'd do the job if I sent you over there. But you needn't get mad. It didn't do me no good. Betty's already married." "What?" I yelled. He ducked instinctively. "Yeah," he says. "He took advantage of your absence to pop the question, and she accepted him, and they're on their way to Kansas City for their honeymoon. He never had the nerve to ask her while you was in town, for fear you'd shoot him. They're going to live in the East 'cause he's too scared of you to come back." "Who?" I screamed, foaming slightly at the mouth. "Rudwell Shapley Jr.," says he. "It's all your fault." It was at this moment that I dislocated Biz Ridgway's hind leg. I likewise defies the criticism which has been directed at this perfectly natural action. An Elkins with a busted heart is no man to trifle with. End of Texas John Alden. End of Bear Creek Collection, Volume 2.